This is King Charles's first state visit to a Commonwealth country, and the pomp and pageantry might be typical of a royal visit, but there have been growing calls for the king to apologise for colonial-era abuses there, something he acknowledged today.
The wrongdoings of the past are a cause of the greatest sorrow and the deepest regret. There were abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans, and for that, there can be no excuse.
The King made reference to painful aspects of the UK and Kenya's shared history, including the Mau Mau rebellion of the 1950s, where thousands of Kenyans were killed. Though Britain has given nearly £20 million in compensation to the Mau Mau tribe, others have received nothing, nor has there ever been a formal apology.
Well, my message to King Charles is simple. He owes very many Kenyans and very many Africans an apology. And it's about time that they addressed the question of reparations. Very many people lost their lives in the quest for liberating Kenya and even other countries who were former British colony.
The people I represent want a clear apology for what happened to them. The fact that their lands were taken away and that they were ill-treated. They want that to be acknowledged and for there to be compensation paid for what happened to them.
It's not just in Kenya where conversations about apologies and reparations are simmering. Prince William and Kate's visit to the Caribbean last year was seen as an attempt to shore up support for the Commonwealth, but ended up being plagued by protests. Royal visits like this aren't seen as picturesque photo ops anymore. For some, they're a chance for history to be revisited and for uncomfortable questions to be asked about the monarchy's past. Now, as we said, it's not just in Kenya where questions around formal apologies and reparations are being asked. It's a debate happening throughout the Commonwealth. Where joining me now are Asif Ahmed, the former British High Commissioner to Jamaica and the Bahamas, and Carla Astafan, Chair of St Kitts and Nevis Reparations Committee, who also sits on the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Thank you so much for joining us. Asif, there are growing calls in Kenya for King Charles to apologise for the colonial past. He said wrongdoings of the past were abhorrent, unjustified acts. It's not an apology, but is that enough?
Well, it'll never be enough to recompense for the suffering that was endured in Kenya and many other places where Britain has a difficult history. But I think there's a point that arises every time, whether it's the King or a resident of the British government or Prime Minister, that the call for apology is made, and we always fall slightly short of that because it's immediately followed by a call for financial compensation. Some people who campaign for reparations say that that can be in a non-financial way. It could be cultural, it could be educational. That's fine. But I think no government is going to put the British taxpayer in jeopardy by having an apology, and then that follows by a demand for payment.
Carla, what did you make of what the King said? Wrongdoings of the past were abhorrent, unjustified acts. You've been campaigning for reparations. Was that a positive sign for you?
While it is positive, I believe that the apology has to be made so that, we can begin somewhere. This constant choking, as one writer said, and not saying the word, we are sorry, really puts us at a disadvantage. So we cannot move forward.
Carla, as Asif said, if there is that apology, that I'm sorry, maybe they're choking over the words because if that happens, then money will follow. So it's not going to happen, is it, do you think?
Well, it does need to happen. And I think the charge has been led over the past few months by some descendants, and I think they are going to put the pressure on British government so that they can issue that apology. We have seen the Trevilians, we have seen Gladstone, and so we are looking forward now to hearing. This dancing around the issue has to stop.
Asif, you've sat in a lot of these meetings in diplomatic circles, top diplomatic circles. Is this even brought up? Is this mentioned at all?
Well, my experience both in Jamaica and the Bahamas, to which I was the accredited High Commissioner, no government minister ever raised this with me. So it really is something that sometimes arises when the Caribbean ministers meet, because these are part of a campaign that they have to respond to. But there's no current process where governments in the Caribbean are putting a proposition to the United Kingdom, and no civil servant is employed currently in Whitehall dealing with this subject. But I'd also add that the emphasis is always on Britain. You don't hear the same sort of discussion when France, Spain, or Portugal sends their head of state to such countries.
Carla, I just wanted to pick up on Asif's point there. This conversation isn't happening anywhere. It's not even in the room. So what's the realistic chance that it's going to happen?
We are aware, and of course, we are looking at other governments. They have written to other governments in Europe. But the fact is, for us here in the region, many of our islands are former British colonies. The British have been here for hundreds of years. Yes, the French were on St. Kitts, for instance, but under the Treaty of Versailles, the island was passed over to the British. The British and the French had warred over several years. They were in Jamaica. They were in all of the islands. We are former British colonies, so we start there. This is the reason we start there, because the greatest benefit was to England.
But Carla, just in terms of practicalities, how would reparations work, for example? Asif's just talking about the cost to the British taxpayer. How will that be divvied up? How would that practically work?
The cost to the British taxpayer. What about the cost? We have had a cost to our development. You know, have we been able to develop? When enslaved people were brought here, they worked without pay. They received no compensation. There has been many different attempts. The grants and the aid that have been given over time, that's not reparations. The planters, the owners of enslaved people were compensated. Britain took out a loan for that back then. So that loan was actually paid by even our descendants who live in England. So why shouldn't Britain look at, you know, making some form of reparatory justice to our islands today?
And Asif, just briefly, I wanted to bring you in finally. Just practically, if King Charles hasn't apologised, where does this leave the debate? There are growing calls, so where does it leave it?
I think it's legitimate that we should address, as we are doing through Black History Month, to remind people of the colonial history. I don't think the issue is taught very well in British schools, and not many people are really aware of it. And then you have the reactionary anti-woke brigade who jump on any attempt to tell a story of colonialism that is not the Mills and Boone version. I think that is legitimate. I think the concern is also legitimate.
Asif Ahmed, sorry to stop you there. Asif Ahmed, Carla Asfan, thank you very much for speaking to us. We've run out of time, but thank you for your time.